and we shall continue with Count of Monte Cristo. Oh, I have to read Roman numerals again. One sec. Cool, gotcha. Right. Chapter 36. The Carnival in Rome. When Franz recovered his senses, he found Albert drinking a glass of water, which his pale colour showed he needed urgently, and the Count already putting on his clown's costume. He automatically looked into the square. Everything had vanished. Scaffold, executioners, victims. Only the people remained, noisy, busy, jovial. The bell on the Monte Cristo, which was rung only for the death of the Pope and the beginning of the Mascherata, was pouring forth its sound. "What happened?" he asked the Count. "Nothing," he replied. "Nothing at all, as you can see. But the carnival has begun, so let's quickly get dressed." "So, nothing is left of that awful scene but the vestige of a dream?" "Because it was nothing more than a dream or a nightmare that you had." "Yes, that's as may be, but what about the condemned man?" "Also a dream, except that he remained asleep while you woke up. Who can tell which of you is the more fortunate?" "And Peppino?" Franz asked. "What became of him?" "Peppino is a sensible lad, not at all vain, and, unlike most men who are furious when no one is paying attention to them, he was delighted to see that all eyes were turned on his fellow prisoner. As a result, he took advantage of the distraction to slip away into the crowd and disappear, without even thanking the worthy priests who had accompanied him. Man is undoubtedly a most ungrateful and selfish creature. But you must dress. Look, Monsieur de Morcerf is setting you a good example." Albert was mechanically drawing on his taffeta trousers over his black trousers and polished boots. "Well, Albert," Franz asked, "are you enjoying these departures from custom? Tell me honestly." "No," he said, "but I am truly pleased now to have seen such a thing, and I understand what Monsieur le Comte said, namely that once one has managed to become accustomed to such a spectacle, it is the only one that is still able to arouse any emotion in you." "Besides which," said the Count, "it is only at that moment that one can make a study of character. On the first step of the scaffold, death tears away the mask that one has worn all one's life, and the true face appears. It must be admitted that Andreas was not a pretty sight. What a horrible scoundrel! Come, gentlemen, let's get dressed." It would have been ridiculous for Franz to start putting on airs and not follow the example given by his two companions, so he in turn put on his costume and his mask, which was certainly no whiter than his face. When they were dressed, they went down. The carriage was waiting at the door, full of confetti and bouquets of flowers. They joined the queue of traffic. It is hard to imagine a more complete contrast with what had just taken place. Instead of the gloomy and silent spectacle of death, the Piazza del Popolo was the scene of unbridled and garish merrymaking. A crowd of masked figures cascaded forth, bursting out on all sides, pouring through the doors and clambering through the windows. Carriages were emerging from every side street, laden with pierrots, harlequins and dominoes, marquesses and plebeians, grotesques, knights and peasants, all yelling, waving their hands, throwing flower-filled eggs, confetti or bunches of flowers, assaulting friend and foe, stranger and acquaintance with words and missiles, without anyone having the right to object, with not a single reaction permitted except laughter. Franz and Albert were like men who had been conducted to an orgy to help them forget some awful grief, and who, the more they drank and the more they became intoxicated, felt a curtain descend between the past and the present. They could still see, or rather they continued to feel inside them, the shadow of what they had witnessed. But little by little they were possessed by the intoxication of the crowd. Their minds began to feel unsteady, and the power of reason seemed to be slipping away. They experienced a strange need to take part in this noise, this movement, this dizziness. A handful of confetti which struck Morcerf, thrown from a nearby carriage, covered him in dust, as it did his two companions, while stinging his neck and wherever on his face was not covered by the mask, as if a gross of pins had been thrown at him. But it had the effect of driving him into the fray in which all the masks they encountered were already engaged. He rose in turn in the carriage, filled his hands from the sacks, and hurled eggs and draguets at his neighbours with all the strength and skill he could muster. Now battle was joined. The recollection of what they had witnessed half an hour earlier entirely vanished from the minds of the two young men, so much were they distracted by the many-coloured, ever-moving, demented spectacle before their eyes. As for the Count of Monte Cristo, he had not once, as we have already observed, appeared to be impressed for a moment. If you were to imagine that lovely and magnificent thoroughfare, the Corso, lined from one end to the other on either side with 4- or 5-story mansions, each with its balconies spread with hangings, and every window decked with draperies, and at the balconies and the windows 300,000 spectators, Romans, Italians, or foreigners from the 4 corners of the earth, every form of aristocracy brought together, aristocracy of birth, aristocracy of money, aristocracy of talent, charming women who, themselves carried away by the spectacle, are bending over the balconies and leaning out of the windows to shower the carriages passing beneath with a hail of confetti, which is repaid in bunches of flowers. The air thick with falling confetti and rising flowers, and then on the road itself, a joyful, unceasing, demented crowd with crazy costumes, huge cabbages walking along, buffalo heads roaring on men's bodies, dogs apparently walking on their hind legs. And in the midst of all this, in the midst of this temptation of St. Anthony as it might have been dreamed by Callot, a mask raised for some Astarte to reveal her delicious features, which you want to follow but from which you are kept back by demons such as might haunt a nightmare. Then you would have a rough idea of what the Carnival is like in Rome. On the second circuit, the Count had the carriage stopped and asked his companions' permission to leave them, with the carriage at their disposal. Franz looked up. They were opposite the Palazzo Rospoli, and at the middle window, outside which there was a sheet of white damask with a red cross, he saw a blue domino costume under which he had no difficulty imagining the lovely Greek from the Teatro Argentina. "Gentlemen," said the Count, "when you are tired of being actors and would like to become spectators again, you know that there are places for you in my windows. Meanwhile, please make use of my carriage, my coachman, and my servants." We forgot to mention that the Count's coachman was dressed soberly in a black bear's skin, exactly like the one worn by Audrey in The Bear and the Pasha, and that the 2 lackeys standing behind the barouche had green monkey costumes, and masks on springs with which they were making faces at the passers-by. Franz thanked the Count for his kind offer. As for Albert, he was engaged in flirting with a whole carriage full of Roman peasants, which, like the Count's, had stopped to take a rest, as vehicles are accustomed to do in traffic. He was showering it with bouquets. Unfortunately for him, the traffic started to move again, and he found himself turning back towards the Piazza del Popolo, while the carriage which had attracted his attention was going up towards the Palazzo di Venezia. "Oh, I say," he said to Franz, "didn't you see?" "What?" Franz asked. "There, that barouche which is going off, full of Roman peasants." "No." "Well, I'm sure they are charming ladies." "What a pity you are masked, my dear Albert," said Franz. "This was an opportunity to make up for your disappointment in love." "Oh, I hope the carnival will not end without bringing me some kind of consolation," he replied, half laughing and half serious. Despite these hopes, the whole day passed without any other adventure except 2 or 3 further meetings with the carriage bearing the Roman peasant women. On one of these occasions, either by accident or by design, Albert's mask fell off. At this, he took the rest of the bouquet of flowers and threw it into the other barouche. One of the charming women whom Albert perceived under the fetching costume of a peasant from the Romagna must have been touched by this gallantry, because when the two friends' carriage next passed by, she in turn threw them a bouquet of violets. Albert seized the flowers. As Franz had no reason to think that they were intended for him, he let Albert take them. Albert victoriously fixed the sprig of violets in his buttonhole, and the carriage continued its triumphal progress. "There you are," said Franz. "That could be the start of an adventure." "Laugh as loud as you wish," he replied, "but I really think so. I am not going to let go of this bouquet." "Don't dream of it," said Franz, laughing. "It will serve as a mark of recognition." The joke was soon close to reality, because when Franz and Albert, still carried along by the line of traffic, next passed the carriage with the contadine, the one who had thrown the sprig of violets to Albert clapped her hands when she saw it in his buttonhole. "Bravo, my dear friend, bravo," said Franz. "This is developing splendidly. Shall I go? Would you rather be alone?" No, let's not rush things. I don't want to be fooled by what is just a first step, a meeting under the clock, as we say at the Bal de l'Opera. If the lovely peasant has any wish to go further, then we'll meet up with her again tomorrow, or rather she will meet up with us. Then she can give me some sign of life, and I'll see what is to be done." "There's no denying it, my dear Albert," said Franz. "You are as wise as Nestor and as prudent as Ulysses. And if your Circe is to change you into some beast or other, she will have to be either very clever or very powerful." Albert was right. The beautiful stranger had no doubt decided not to carry the intrigue any further that day, because, although the two young men made several more circuits, they did not find the carriage they were looking for. It had no doubt disappeared down one of the neighbouring side streets. So they went back to the Palazzo Rospoli, but the Count too had vanished, with the blue domino. The two windows hung with yellow damask continued to be occupied by people who were no doubt his guests. At that moment the same bell that had announced the opening of the mascherata sounded its end. At once the procession of traffic up and down the Corso dissolved, and all the carriages quickly vanished into the adjoining streets. Franz and Albert were next to the Via del Marate. The coachman turned into it without a word, and, travelling past the Palazzo Poli to the Piazza di Spagna, he pulled up next to the hotel. Signor Pastrini came to the door to welcome his guests. Franz's first consideration was to find out about the Count and express his regret at not having returned to pick him up in time. But Signor Pastrini reassured him by letting him know that the Count of Monte Cristo had ordered a second carriage for himself, which had gone to the Palazzo Rospoli for him at 4 o'clock. Moreover, he had been requested on the Count's behalf to offer the two friends the key to his box in the theatre. Franz asked Albert what he intended to do, but Albert had some important plans to carry out before he could think about going to the theatre, so instead of replying, he asked if Signor Pastrini could find him a tailor. "A tailor?" said the hotelier. "For what?" "To make us some Roman peasant costumes by tomorrow, as elegant as possible." Signor Pastrini shook his head. "2 costumes by tomorrow?" he said. "I beg your Excellency's pardon, but that is a very French request. 2 costumes? You will certainly not find a tailor in Rome during the next week who will agree to sew 6 buttons on a waistcoat for you, even if you were to pay him an echo apiece for them." "So we must give up our idea of getting these costumes?" "Not at all, because we have them ready-made. Let me look after it, and tomorrow, when you wake up, you will find a collection of hats, jackets and breeches which will meet your requirements." "Leave it up to our host," Franz said. "He has already shown us that he is a man of resource." "So why don't we have a quiet dinner, then go and see l'Italiana in Algerie?" "Very well, let it be l'Italiana in Algerie," said Albert. "But consider, Signor Pastrini, that this gentleman and I, indicating France, attach the highest importance to having the costumes that we asked for tomorrow morning. The innkeeper once more reassured his guests that they had nothing to worry about and that their needs would be fully met, so Franz and Albert went upstairs to take off their clown's costumes. As he was getting out of his, Albert was very careful to put away his sprig of violets, which would serve as a sign of recognition for the next day. The two friends sat down to dinner, but as they were eating, Albert could not refrain from pointing out the marked difference between the respective merits of Signor Pastrini's cook and the one employed by the Count of Monte Cristo, and indeed honesty obliged Franz to confess, despite the reservations he still seemed to have on the subject of the Count, that the comparison was not to the advantage of Signor Pastrini's chef. Over dessert, the servant inquired to know the time when the two young men would like their carriage. Albert and Franz exchanged glances, because they were really afraid that they might be taking too many liberties. The servant understood. "His Excellency the Count of Monte Cristo," he said, "has given definite orders that the carriage should remain at the disposal of their lordships for the whole day. Their lordships can therefore make use of it without any compunction." They determined to enjoy the Count's courtesy to the full, and asked for the horses to be harnessed while they went to change out of their daytime clothes into evening ones, the others having been slightly rumpled by the events of the day. After that they repaired to the Teatro Argentina and took their places in the Count's box. During the first act, Countess G came into her box. The first place she looked was towards the place where, the previous evening, she had seen the Count, so that she saw Franz and Albert in the box of the man about whom she had expressed such a strange opinion to Franz a day earlier. Her opera glasses interrogated him with such emphasis that Franz realized it would be cruel to leave her curiosity unsatisfied any longer. So, taking advantage of the privilege of spectators in Italian theatres, which allows them to use the playhouses as their reception rooms, the two friends left their box to present their regards to the Countess. No sooner had they come into her box than she motioned to Franz to take the place of honour. Albert sat behind them. "Well then," she said, hardly giving Franz time to sit down, "it appears that you cannot wait to make the acquaintance of this new Lord Ruthwen, and that you are now the very best of friends?" "Although we are not quite as intimate as you imply, I cannot deny, Madame la Comtesse, that we have taken advantage of his hospitality all day." "How? All day?" "That's precisely it. This morning we took lunch from him. We went up and down the Corso in his carriage throughout the Mascherata, and finally this evening we are in his box at the theatre." "Does this mean that you are now acquaintances?" "Yes and no." "What do you mean?" "It's a long story." "Tell it to me." "You would be too frightened by it. All the more reason." "At least wait until the story has an ending." "Agreed. I do like stories to be complete. Meanwhile, how did you make contact? Who introduced you to him?" "No one. On the contrary, he had himself introduced." "When?" "Yesterday, after we left you." "By what means?" "Oh, the most banal imaginable, through the intermediary of our landlord." "Is he staying at the Hôtel de Londres, then, like you?" "Not only in the same hotel, but on the same floor." "What's his name? You must at least know his name." "Of course. The Count of Monte Cristo." What kind of a name is that? It's not the name of any family." "No, it's the name of an island he has purchased." "Is he a count?" "Yes, a Tuscan count." "Ha! We must learn to swallow that," said the Countess, who came from one of the oldest families in the Venezia. "What kind of a man is he otherwise?" "Ask the Vicomte de Morcerf." "Do you hear that, monsieur? I am being referred to you." We would be very hard to please if we were not to find him pleasing, madame," said Albert, A friend of 10 years could not have done more for us than he did, and with the grace, delicacy of feeling and courtesy that betray a genuine man of the world." "Come, come," said the Countess, laughing. "You will find that my vampire is quite simply some nouveau riche who wants to be excused for his wealth and who has adopted the mask of Lara so as not to be mistaken for Rothschild. Did you see her?" "Her?" Franz asked with a smile. "The beautiful Greek from yesterday." "No, I do believe that we heard the sound of her guzla, but she herself remained completely invisible." "My dear Franz," said Albert, "when you say invisible, you are so quite simply trying to be mysterious. Who do you think was that blue domino we saw in the window hung with white damask?" "And where was this window with the white damask?" asked the Countess. "At the Palazzo Rospoli." "So the Count had 3 windows in the Palazzo Rospoli?" "Yes. Did you drive down the Corso?" "Naturally." "And did you notice 2 windows with yellow damask and one with white damask marked with a red cross? Those were the Count's." "Well, I never! Do you know what it costs to have 3 windows like those for Carnival week in the Palazzo Rospoli? That is to say, the best place on the Corso?" 200 or 300 Roman ecu." 2,000 or 3,000, you should say." "The devil it does!" "Does his island bring in such an income?" "His island? Not a baiocco." "So why did he buy it?" "On a whim." "He's an eccentric." "The fact is," said Albert, "that he did seem quite eccentric to me. My dear man, if he were to live in Paris and go to our theatres, I would say that he was either a hoaxer or else some poor devil destroyed by literature. There's no denying he made 2 or 3 quips this morning, worthy of Didier or Antony." At this moment a visitor came in, and Franz gave up his seat to the newcomer, according to custom. This move and the disturbance changed the subject of conversation. An hour later, the 2 friends returned to the hotel. Signor Pastrini had already taken care of their disguises for the next day and promised them that they would be pleased with the results of his ingenious efforts. The next morning at 9 he came into Franz's room, accompanied by a tailor carrying 8 or 10 Roman peasant costumes. The 2 friends chose 2 alike, more or less of their size, and requested their host to have about 20 ribbons sewn to each of their hats, and to obtain for them 2 of those charming striped silk scarves in bright colours that the men of the people are accustomed to tie around their waists on holidays. Albert was anxious to see how he looked in his new costume. It was a jacket and trousers of blue velvet, embroidered stockings, buckled shoes, and a silk waistcoat. Indeed, Albert could not do otherwise than look elegant in this picturesque costume, and when the belt was fastened round his slender waist, and his hat, tilted a little to one side, let a shower of ribbons fall over his shoulder, Franz was obliged to admit that dress often has a lot to do with the superior physique that we attribute to some nations. The Turks, so picturesque in the old days with their long, brightly coloured robes, are now hideous in their blue-buttoned frock coats and those Greek hats which make them look like wine bottles with red tops. Don't you agree? Franz complimented Albert, who, moreover, was standing in front of the mirror and smiling at himself with a quite unmistakable air of self-satisfaction. It was at this point that the Count of Monte Cristo came in. "Gentlemen," he said, "since, agreeable though it is to have a companion in pleasure, freedom is more agreeable still, I have come to tell you that I am leaving the carriage that you used yesterday at your disposal today and for the following days. Our host must have told you that I have 3 or 4 at livery with him, so you are not depriving me in any way. Feel free to enjoy it, either for pleasure or for business. Our meeting place, should we have anything to say to one another, is the Palazzo Rospoli." The 2 young friends tried to make some objection, but there was really no good reason to refuse an offer which suited them very well, so eventually they accepted. The Count stayed with them for about a quarter of an hour, conversing fluently on every subject. As we have already been able to observe, he was well acquainted with the literature of every country. A glance at the walls of his drawing room had shown Franz and Albert that he was a connoisseur of fine art. A few unpretentious words, which he let slip in passing, proved that he was not without some understanding in science. It appeared that he had particularly concerned himself with chemistry. The two friends did not presume to repay the Count for the luncheon he had given them. It would have been a poor jest to offer him, in exchange for his excellent table, the very mediocre fare that made up Signor Pastrini's table d'hôte. They said as much openly, and he accepted their excuses with evident appreciation of their thoughtfulness. Albert was charmed by the Count's manners, and was only prevented from recognizing him as a true aristocrat because of his learning. Most of all, he was delighted at being able to have full use of the carriage. He had some ideas concerning his graceful peasant girls, and since they had appeared to him in a very elegant carriage, he was not sorry at being able to continue to seem to be on an equal footing with them in this respect. At 1:30, the two friends went downstairs. The coachman and the footman had had the notion of putting their livery on over their wild animal skins, which made them look even more grotesque than the day before, and were complimented warmly by Albert and Franz. Albert had sentimentally attached his sprig of fading violets to his buttonhole. At the first sound of the bell, they set off and hurried into the Corso down the Via Vittoria. On their second circuit, a bouquet of fresh violets thrown from a carriage full of young lady clowns into the Count's barouche told Albert that, like himself and his friend, the peasant girls from the previous day had changed costume, and, whether by accident or by reason of the same feeling that had inspired him, gallantly to adopt their costume, they had chosen the one that he and Franz had been wearing. Albert put the fresh flowers in place of the old ones, but kept the faded bouquet in his hand, and when he once more passed by the barouche, lifted it tenderly to his lips. Not only the person who had thrown it to him, but also her companions, seemed to find this highly amusing. The day was no less lively than the one before. A careful observer might have even noticed more noise and more merriment. The Count was seen for a moment at the window, but when the carriage came round again, he had already gone. It goes without saying that the flirtatious exchange between Albert and the lady clown with the bunch of violets lasted the whole day. That evening, when he returned, Franz found a letter from the embassy telling him that he would have the honour of an audience with His Holiness the following day. On every previous occasion when he had visited Rome, he had asked for and obtained the same favour, and, for religious reasons and out of gratitude, he did not want to stop off in the capital of the Christian world without paying a respectful homage to one of the successors of St. Peter, who stands as a rare example of all the Christian virtues. So he did not intend to go to the Carnival the next day, for, despite the benevolence with which he tempers his grandeur, it is always with respect full of deep emotion that one prepares to bow before that noble and saintly old man, Gregory XVI. Coming out of the Vatican, Franz went straight back into the hotel, deliberately avoiding the Corso. He was carrying with him a treasure of pious thoughts which would have been profaned by the wild merriment of the mascherata. At 5:10, Albert returned. He was overjoyed. The clown had resumed her peasant costume and, while passing by Albert's barouche, lifted her mask. She was enchanting. Franz sincerely congratulated his friend, who took the compliments as no more than his due. By certain signs of authentic elegance, he claimed to have recognized that the beautiful stranger must belong to the highest ranks of Roman society. He was determined to write to her the next day. While Albert was confiding in him, Franz noticed that he seemed to have a question he wanted to put, but hesitated to ask. He pressed him, declaring that he would promise in advance to make any sacrifice he could for his friend's happiness. Albert allowed himself Excuse me again. Albert allowed himself to be entreated for just as long as good manners required between friends, and finally confessed to Franz that he would do him a great service if he were to leave him in sole charge of the carriage on the following day. He attributed the lovely peasant's exceptional kindness in lifting her mask to the absence of his friend. Naturally, Franz was not so selfish that he would hinder Albert in the midst of an adventure that promised to be so satisfactory both for his curiosity and for his self-esteem. He was well enough acquainted with his friend's exceptional lack of discretion to realise that he would be kept informed of the smallest details of his success. And since, in 2 or 3 years of travelling the length and breadth of Italy, he had never had the good fortune even to begin such an intrigue on his own account, Franz was not displeased to discover how matters proceeded in such cases. So he promised Albert that on the following day he would be content to watch the scene from the windows of the Palazzo Rospoli. The next day he saw Albert going past again and again with a huge bouquet, no doubt acting as the bearer of a love letter. This probability became certainty when Franz saw the same bouquet, immediately identifiable by a circle of white camellias, in the hands of a delightful clown dressed in pink satin. That evening there was not merely joy, but delirium. Albert had no doubt that the beautiful stranger would answer him by the same means. Franz accepted his wishes by saying that he found all that noise tiring and had decided to spend the following day looking through his album and making notes. Albert was not mistaken. The following evening he came leaping in a single bound into Franz's room, holding a sheet of paper by one of its corners and brandishing it in the air. "Well, was I mistaken?" "Did she reply?" Franz exclaimed. "Read it." The tone of Albert's voice as he said this would be impossible to convey. Franz took the letter and read. "On Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, get out of your carriage at the entrance to Via dei Pontefici, and follow the Roman peasant woman, who will take hold of your Mokoletto. When you reach the first step of the church of San Giacomo, make sure to tie a pink ribbon on the shoulder of your clown's costume so that you can be recognized. Between now and then you will not see me again. Constancy and discretion." "Well now," he asked Franz when the latter had finished reading, "what do you think of that, dear friend?" "I think," said Franz, "that the business is taking on the character of a most agreeable adventure." "I think the same, and I am very afraid that you may be going alone to the Duke of Bracciano's ball." The very same morning, Franz and Albert had received invitations from the celebrated Roman banker. "Take care, my dear Albert," said Franz. "All of high society will be at the Duke's, and if your beautiful stranger is really an aristocrat, she will not be able to escape putting in an appearance. Whether she does or not, I shall not alter my opinion of her. Have you read the letter?" "Yes." "Don't you know how poorly educated the women of the Mezzocito are in Italy?" This was a term designating the bourgeoisie. "Yes," Franz replied again. "So, reread the note, examine the writing, and tell me if there is a single mistake in grammar or spelling." The writing was certainly charming, the spelling faultless. "You are predestined," Franz said, once more returning the letter. "Laugh if you wish, joke as much as you like," Albert went on. "I am in love." "Good Lord, you scare me," said Franz. "I can see that not only will I be going alone to the Duke of Bracciano's ball, but I may well also find myself returning on my own to Florence. The fact is that, if my stranger is as agreeable as she is beautiful, then I do declare I shall be settling in Rome for at least 6 weeks. I adore the city, and in any case I have always had this marked predilection for archaeology." "Decidedly. A few more meetings like this one, and I feel sure that we shall see you elected to the Académie d'Inscription des Belles Lettres." Albert looked as though he were about to argue seriously his claims to the academic chair, but at that moment a servant came to tell the young friends that dinner was served. Love for Albert was not incompatible with a healthy appetite, so he hurried to sit down at the table beside his friend, though quite ready to resume the discussion after dinner. After dinner, however, the Count of Monte Cristo was announced. They had not seen him for 2 days. Business, according to Signor Pastrini, had taken him to Civitavecchia. He had left the evening before and got back only an hour ago. He was charming. Whether because he was watching, or whether because the circumstances did not strike those acrimonious chords that on other occasions had charged his utterances with bitterness, he was more or less like other men. France found him truly enigmatic. The Count could not doubt that the young traveller had recognized him, yet not a single word had fallen from his lips since their acquaintance was renewed to suggest that they had ever met before. For his part, much though Franz would have liked to have referred to their previous interview, he was restrained by the fear of displeasing a man who had shown such consideration towards him and his friend, so he went on copying the other man's reserve. The Count had learned that the two friends wanted a box in the Teatro Argentina and had been told that all places were reserved, so he was once more bringing them the key to his box. At least, this was the avowed purpose of his visit. Franz and Albert objected, on the grounds that they did not want to deprive the Count, but he replied that he was going to the Teatro Palli that evening, so his box at the Argentina would be wasted if they did not take advantage of it. This made up their minds. Franz was becoming accustomed to the Count's pallor, which had struck him so forcibly on first meeting. He could not deny the beauty of the man's stern face, of which the pale colour was either the only defect or perhaps the chief quality. Franz, a true Byronic hero, could not see or even think of him without imagining those sombre features on the shoulders of Manfred or under Lara's headdress. He had the furrowed brow that spoke of bitter, inescapable thoughts. He had those burning eyes that penetrate to the depths of a soul. He had those haughty, contemptuous lips which give the words that issue from them a particular bent, so that they become deeply engraved in the memory of whoever hears them. The Count was no longer young, 40 at least, yet one could easily understand that he would prevail over any young man among whom he might find himself. The truth is that he also had this in common with the fantastic heroes of the English poet, that he appeared to possess the gift of spellbinding others. Albert was constantly remarking how lucky they had been to meet such a man. Franz was less enthusiastic, though he too was susceptible to the influence exercised by any superior being over those around him. He thought about the plan the Count had mentioned once or twice of going to Paris, and had no doubt that, with his unusual personality, his striking features and his huge wealth, he would make a considerable mark there. Yet he himself would prefer not to be in Paris when the Count was there. The evening passed as most evenings do at the theatre in Italy, not in listening to the singers, but in renewing acquaintances and conversation. The Countess wanted to discuss the Count, but Franz told her that he had something much more novel to tell her, and despite Albert's exhibitions of false modesty, he described the major event that had taken up most of the two friends' thoughts over the previous 3 days. Intrigues of this kind are not rare in Italy, at least if travellers are to be believed, and the Countess, far from expressing incredulity, congratulated Albert on the start of an adventure that promised to end in such a satisfactory manner. They parted, agreeing to meet at the Duke of Bracciano's ball, to which all Rome had been invited. The lady with the bouquet kept her promise to Albert. Neither the next day nor the one after did she give him any sign of life. At last Tuesday came, the last and most rowdy day of the Carnival. On Tuesday the theatres are open at 10 in the morning, because after 8 in the evening Lent starts. On the Tuesday, everyone who, through shortage of time, money or inclination, has not yet taken part in the festival, joins the Bacchanalian orgy, is carried away by the revels and contributes a share of noise and movement to the sum of movement and noise. From 2 until 5, Franz and Albert followed the line of carriages, exchanging handfuls of confetti with those in the line opposite and with the pedestrians walking between the feet of the horses and the wheels of the carriages, without a single accident occurring, a single argument erupting, or a single fight breaking out in all this appalling chaos. The Italians are supreme in this respect. A festivity for them is a genuine festivity. The author of this story, who lived for 5 or 6 years in Italy, can never once remember having seen a celebration interrupted by any of those disturbances that inevitably accompany our own. Albert was a huge success in his clown's costume. On his shoulder he had a knotted pink ribbon, the ends of which fell down to his knees. To avoid any confusion between them, Franz had kept his Roman peasant's costume. As the day wore on, so the noise grew greater. On all those pavements, in all those carriages, at all those windows, not a single mouth remained silent, not a single arm remained still. It was a veritable human storm, made up of a thunder of voices and a hail of dragees, bouquets, eggs, oranges, and flowers. At 3 o'clock, the sound of cannon being fired across the Piazza del Popolo and the Palazzo di Venezia, though it could only just be heard through this awful tumult, announced that the races were about to begin. The races, like the Mokoleti, are a particular feature of the last days of Carnival. At the sound of these cannon, the carriages instantly broke ranks and each headed for the side street nearest wherever they happened to be. All these manoeuvres take place with unbelievable skill and wonderful speed, without the police bothering in the slightest to assign anyone to a post or to show anyone where he should go. Those on foot pressed themselves against the palazzi. Then a great sound of horses' hoofs and a rattling of sabres was heard. A squadron of carabinieri, 15 abreast, galloped the whole length of the Corso, clearing it in readiness for the Barberi. When the squadron reached the Palazzo di Venezia, the sound of another roll of cannon gave the signal that the road was clear. Almost at once, in the midst of a vast, universal, inconceivable clamour, they saw 7 or 8 horses go past like wraiths, driven on by the cheering of 300,000 voices and the metal castanets clattering on their backs. Then the cannon in the Castel Sant'Angelo fired 3 times. This meant that number 3 was the winner. Needing no other signal but that, the carriages moved off again, cascading back towards the Corso, flowing out from every street like tributaries that had been dammed for a moment, before simultaneously pouring back into the bed of a river that they fed, and the huge torrent resumed its course, swifter than ever, between the 2 granite banks. Now, however, a new element had added still further to the noise and movement of the crowd. The sellers of Mokoleti had come onto the scene. Mokoleti, or Mokoleti, are candles of varying thickness, from an Easter candle to a taper, which excite 2 contradictory ambitions in the actors of the great finale of the Roman Carnival. First, to keep one's own Mokoletto alight, second, to extinguish everyone else's. The same is true of the Mokoletto as of life. Mankind has so far found only one way of transmitting it, which he owes to God. But he has found 1,000 ways to extinguish it, and here the devil has surely given him some little help. A Mokoletto is lit by bringing it up to another source of light. But who can describe the 1,000 ways that have been invented to put out a Mokoletto? Great puffs of breath, monstrous bellows, superhuman fans. Everyone hastened to buy Mokoleti, Franz and Albert with the rest. Night was falling fast. Already, at the cry "Mokoleti," repeated by the strident voices of 1,000 manufacturers, 2 or 3 stars began to shine above the crowd. This was the signal. In 10 minutes, 50,000 lights glittered all the way from the Palazzo di Venezia to the Piazza del Popolo, and back up from the Piazza del Popolo to the Palazzo di Venezia. It was like a vast congregation of will-o'-the-wisps, impossible to envisage if you have never seen it. Imagine that all the stars in the sky were to come down and dance wildly about the earth to the accompaniment of cries such as no human ear has ever heard elsewhere on its surface. This is the time, above all, when class distinctions are abolished. The Facchino takes hold of the prince of the Trastevere of the bourgeois, each one blowing out, extinguishing and relighting. If old Aeolus were to appear at this moment, he would be proclaimed king of the Mokoleti, and Aquilo the heir presumptive to the throne. This wild, blazing dash lasted some 2 hours. The Corso was lit as if in broad daylight, and the features of the spectators' faces could be distinguished up to the 3rd or 4th story. Every 5 minutes Albert took out his watch. At last it showed 7 o'clock. The two friends had reached exactly the corner of the Via de Pontefici. Albert leapt out of the carriage, his Mokoletto in his hand. 2 or 3 masked figures tried to come up to him, either to put it out or take it away, but Albert was a skilled boxer. He sent them reeling a good 10 yards, one after the other, and continued running towards the church of San Giacomo. The steps were crowded with bystanders and masked figures struggling to take the candles from each other's hands. Franz watched Albert as he went, and he saw him put his foot on the first step. Almost at once, a masked figure, wearing the familiar costume of the peasant girl with the bouquet, reached out and took his Mokoletto, without Albert this time offering any resistance. Franz was too far away to hear what they said, but her words were doubtless reassuring, for he saw Albert and the girl walk off, arm in arm. For a time he followed them through the crowd, but he lost sight of them at the Via Marcello. Suddenly the bell which signals the end of the carnival rang out, and at the same moment all the Mokkoli went out simultaneously, as if by enchantment. You would have thought that one single enormous breath of wind had extinguished them all. Franz found himself in total darkness. At the same moment all the cries ceased, as if the breath of wind that had put out the lights had carried off the noise at the same time. All that could be heard was the rumbling of the carriages as they took the masked figures home. All that could be seen were the few lights burning behind the windows. The carnival was over. And I think that is probably a good place to take a break. So many Italian words. Are we talking about pronunciation in chat? Is it? Have I pronounced something wrong? A break, indeed. But yes. Also, yes, hi, Sil. God, yeah, there's lots of people who turned up. Also, yes. Hello, Sil. I hope you are well. Thank you for the... Did you resub? You did. Thank you so much. 4 months. Wow. Also, hello, Ray Tracer. Also, thank you for the sub. Was anywhere else? Oh, yeah, Boodot. Oh, hi. I hope you are all well, and I'm doing well with the pronunciations today. Yeah. Well, I did you read yeah, that yeah, I know some Italian. This is what happens when you're a classically trained singer. You have to learn Italian, at least how to pronounce it. Good language, love it. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm joking, Budot. You're great, really. Thank you for being here. Yes, thank you all for being here. You're all wonderful. Do like all the Italian bits. Good. I'm glad. I do too. I enjoy pronouncing Italian. It's fun. Oh, been there. Yep. I know the feeling. Yep. Yes, the mic is not mine. It's Sam's. But yes, it's very nice. Very fancy. And I hope it is doing good work. But yes, we shall go on a break. Everybody go do break things. Refill liquids and stuff, and we shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. Hello, hello. We are back. Welcome back from the break. I hope you all had a good break. I hope you have done breaky things. I hope you have not broken anything. That's not a breaky thing. But yeah, I hope you've got some form of drink, preferably of the warm kind. And you know what? Done stuff. You're actually on the way to the... Oh, God. I've read too much Italian. My brain's short-circuiting. You're on your way to the sleeps. I hope that you slept me. I'm a working lad. I have no idea why I said that like that. But, yeah, my brain has gone. Yes, I hope if you are off to sleep, then I hope you get good sleeps and get all the good rest. And, yeah, thanks for hopping on by. It is always no brain, all Italian. Precisely. That's probably offensive to Italians. Oh well. But yeah, thanks for being here, Sil, and thanks for resubbing. That's very, very kind of you. And yeah, sleep well. And Budot did a warm-up and consuming of the food. That is a good one. That is a good thing to do. Good night, Sil. Thank you. But yes, I hope everybody has had a good break and are ready for more Count of Monte Cristo. I feel like this, because this is a very nice mic, I feel like I should talk in like, I don't know, advert voice or like, I also did accidentally just boop my nose against the mic. I'm doing well here. Ah, dear. But yes, I think probably I'll just do, because as you can tell, given that chapter took an entire hour, the chapters are getting quite long in this book now. There are occasionally like short chapters just randomly there just to surprise you, but in general they are quite long. So I reckon possibly one more, maybe two more. So there's the next one is quite long, and then the other one's quite short. The next one after that. So I might just do a couple more chapters. Count of Monte Cristo, CEO of Walkers. Yes, I did see Sam's very funny whatever the hell he did. Count of... Where is it? The Cost of Martin Carthy. Thanks. That's... Yep. Yeah, he's realised that you can basically just say anything. It's like Benedict Cumberbatch's name. You can pretty much say da-da-da-da-da-da, and it just any random words, and it will basically mean the same thing as the Count of Monte Cristo, apparently. So I... as I've said many times before, regret that he is in charge of the Chillitracy Twitter account. But he is also provider of tea, so that is good. Oh yes, he was AFK getting tea. Now he has tea. Tea has been got. But yes, shall we continue? Are we sitting comfortably? Ooh, I have tea. Thank you. I might not put it next to that wire. Maybe put it on this side, otherwise I'll just yank the wire. No, I won't do that. He's wonderful, but don't tell him I said that. You're wonderful, Sam. Budot says you're wonderful. We need this in writing. I mean, it is in writing. We need to like screenshot it or clip it or something so that you can hold that against Budot. Right. Stop this. Far too silly. No. Yes, let us continue with... Oh, God, what chapter? Chapter 37. The Catacombs of San Sebastian. Actually, I don't know how to pronounce that. Is it Saint Sebastian? I'm going to go with Saint Sebastian. I'm going to go with the most British pronunciation of that possible. Never in his life, perhaps, had Franz ever felt such a sharply defined and rapid transformation from merriment to sadness as he did at that moment. You would have thought that Rome, under the magic wand of some demon of the night, had changed into one vast tomb. By an eventuality which added to the blackness of the night, the moon was waning and not due to rise until 11 o'clock, so the streets through which the young man walked were plunged in utter darkness. But the journey was short. In 10 minutes his carriage, that is to say the Count's, stopped at the Hôtel de Londres. Dinner was waiting for him, but since Albert had warned him that he might not return immediately, Franz sat down to eat without waiting for him. Signor Pastrini, who was used to seeing them dine together, asked why Albert was not there, but Franz said no more than that his friend had received an invitation 2 days earlier and had accepted it. The sudden extinction of the Mokoleti, the darkness that had replaced the light and the silence that had followed the din, had left Franz feeling melancholy, and even a little tense, so he dined in total silence, even though Signor Pastrini was as attentive as ever and came in 2 or 3 times to ask if he had everything he needed. Franz was determined to wait up as late as possible for Albert, so he ordered the carriage only for 11 o'clock, asking Signor Pastrini to inform him immediately if Albert reappeared at the hotel for any reason. At 11 Albert had not returned, so Franz dressed and left, telling his host that he would be spending the night at the Duke of Bracciano's. The Duke of Bracciano's house is one of the most delightful in Rome. His wife, one of the last heirs of the Colonna family, is a perfect hostess. Consequently, the Duke's entertainments are famous throughout Europe. Franz and Albert had arrived in Rome with letters of introduction to him, so his first question was to ask Franz what had become of his travelling companion. Franz replied that he had left him at the moment just as the Moccoli were about to be extinguished, and that he had lost sight of him in the Via Macello. "And has he not come home?" said the Duke. "I waited for him until now," Franz replied. "Do you know where he was going?" "Not precisely, but I believe that there was some kind of assignation." "Damnation," said the Duke. "This is a bad day, or rather a bad night, to be out late. Don't you think, Madame la Comtesse?" The last words were addressed to Countess G., who had just arrived on the arm of Monsieur Torlonia, the Duke's brother. "On the contrary, I think the night is charming," said the Countess. "Those who are here will only have one thing to complain of, which is that it will go too quickly." The Duke smiled. "I am not talking of those who are here, who run no risk except if they are men that of falling in love with you, and if they are women of falling ill with jealousy at seeing you so beautiful. I am thinking of those who are in the streets of Rome." "Good heavens," said the Countess, "whoever would be in the streets at this time of night unless coming to your ball?" "Our friend Albert de Morcerf, Countess, whom I left in pursuit of his beautiful stranger at 7 o'clock this evening," said Franz. "I haven't seen him since." "What? And you don't know where he is?" "I have not the slightest idea." "Is he armed?" "He's wearing clown's dress." "You should not have let him go," the Duke said. "You know Rome better than he does." "Perhaps, but it was not so easy. One might as well have tried to stop the number 3 horse which won today's race," Franz replied. "In any case, what could happen to him?" "Who knows? The night is very black and the Tiber is quite close to the Via Macello." Franz felt his blood run cold at seeing the Duke and the Countess's thoughts running along similar lines to the ones suggested by his own anxieties. "I informed the hotel that I should have the honour of spending the night at your house, Duke," he said. "They are to come and tell me when he returns." "There," said the Duke. "I think this is one of my servants looking for you now." He was right. Seeing Franz, the servant came over. "Excellency," he said, "the owner of the Hôtel de Londres wishes to inform you that a man is waiting there with a letter from the Vicomte de Morcerf." "A letter from the Vicomte?" Franz exclaimed. "Yes." "Who is this man?" "I cannot tell you." "Why did he not bring it to me here?" "He gave me no explanation." "Where is this messenger?" "He left as soon as he saw me come into the ballroom to speak to you." "Oh, my goodness!" the Countess exclaimed. "Go quickly! Oh, poor young man, perhaps he has had an accident." I'm going this moment," said Franz. "Will you come back and tell us any news?" asked the Countess. "Yes, if the matter is not serious. Otherwise I cannot say where I will be myself." "In any case, be prudent," said the Countess. Don't worry, I shall." Franz took his hat and left hurriedly. He had sent away his carriage, ordering it for 2 o'clock, but fortunately the Palazzo Bracciano, which faces onto the Corso on one side and the Piazza dei Santi Apostoli on the other, is hardly 10 minutes on foot from the Hôtel de Londres. As he approached the hotel, Franz saw a man standing in the middle of the street, and did not doubt for an instant that this was the messenger from Albert. The man was wearing a large cloak. He went over, but, much to Franz's surprise, it was the man who spoke first. "What do you want of me, Excellency?" he said, stepping backwards like a man wanting to keep up his defences. "Aren't you the person who is bringing me a letter from the Vicomte de Morcerf?" Franz asked. "Is your Excellency staying at Pastrini's hotel?" "I am." "And is your Excellency the Viscount's travelling companion?" "Yes." "What is your Excellency's name?" "Baron Franz d'Épinay." "Then this letter is indeed addressed to your Excellency." "Is there to be any reply?" Franz asked, taking the letter from the man's hand. "Yes, at least your friend hopes so." "Come up then, and I'll give it to you." "I should prefer to wait here," the messenger said, laughing. "Why?" "Your Excellency will understand everything when you have read the letter." "So, am I to meet you again here?" "Certainly." Franz went into the hotel and met Signor Pastrini on the stairs. "Well?" the innkeeper asked. "Well, what?" said Franz. "Did you see the man who wanted to speak to you on behalf of your friend?" he asked Franz. "Yes, I saw him," he replied, "and he gave me this letter. Please bring lights to my room." The hotelier gave the order to a servant to go ahead of Franz with a candle. The young man had sensed that Signor Pastrini was afraid, and this made him even more anxious to read Albert's letter. He went close to the candle as soon as it was lit and spread out the sheet of paper. The letter was in Albert's hand and was signed by him. Franz read it twice, so unexpected were its contents. This is precisely what it said. "Dear friend, as soon as you receive this, be so good as to take the letter of credit from my portfolio, which you will find in the square drawer of the writing table. If the amount is not enough, add your own. Go immediately to Torlonius, draw 4,000 piastres and give them to the bearer. It is urgent that this amount should reach me without delay. I shall not insist further. I count on you as you could count on me. P.S. I believe now the Italian Banditi. Your friend, Albert de Morcerf." Beneath these lines was written in a strange hand these few words in Italian. "Se alle 6 della mattina de 4.000 piastre non solo nelle mie mani, alle 7 il conte Alberto ave cessato di vivere. Luigi Vampa." The second signature explained everything to Franz, who understood the messenger's reluctance to come up to his room. The street would seem safer to him. Albert had fallen into the clutches of the famous bandit chief in whose existence he had so long refused to believe. The English translation: "If at 6 in the morning the 4,000 piastres are not in my hands, by 7 o'clock Vicomte Albert de Morcerf will have ceased to exist." There was no time to be lost. He ran to the writing table and opened it. In the drawer mentioned he found the portfolio, and in the portfolio the letter of credit. In all it was for 6,000 piastres, but Albert had already spent 3,000 of them. As for Franz, he had no letter of credit. Since he was living in Florence and had come to Rome for only 7 or 8 days, he had taken about 100 louis with him, and of these at the most 50 were left. This meant that the two of them, Franz and Albert together, were 700 or 800 piastres short of the amount asked for. It is true that in such a case Franz could count on the understanding of Messrs. Torlonia. He was consequently preparing to return to the Palazzo Bracciano immediately, when suddenly he had a brilliant idea. He thought of the Count of Monte Cristo. He was just about to give the order to send for Signor Pastrini when the man appeared in person at the door. "My dear Signor Pastrini," he said eagerly, "do you know if the Count is in?" "Yes, Excellency, he's just returned." "Will he have had time to go to bed yet?" "I doubt it." "Then kindly ring at his door and ask his permission for me to pay him a visit." Signor Pastrini hurried off to carry out these instructions and returned in 5 minutes. "The Count is expecting your Excellency," he said. Franz crossed the landing, and a servant showed him in to the Count, who was in a little study that Franz had not yet seen, with divans around the walls. He came forward to meet him. "What fair wind brings you here at this hour?" he asked. "Are you inviting me to take supper with you? That would be very obliging, I must say." "No, I have come to speak with you on serious business." "Business?" said the Count, giving Franz his usual penetrating look. "What business?" Are we alone?" The Count went across to the door, then returned. "Completely alone," he said. Franz gave him Albert's letter. "Read this," he said. The Count read it and said only, "Ah." "Did you see the postscript?" "Yes, certainly I did. Se alla 6 della mattina del 4.000 piastre non solo nelle mie mani, alla 7 il Conte Alberto aveva cessato di vivere." "What do you say about that?" "Do you have the amount required?" "Yes, except for 800 piastres." The Count went over to his writing table, opened it, and pulled out a drawer full of gold. "I hope," he said, "that you will not insult me by going to anyone else." "On the contrary, you see that I came straight to you," said Franz. "Thank you. Please take what you need," and he motioned towards the drawer. "Is it really necessary to send this money to Luigi Vampa?" the young man asked, staring fixedly at the Count in his turn. "By God, ask yourself, the postscript is clear enough." "It seems to me that if you were to look for it, you would find a means to simplify the negotiation considerably," said Franz. "What means?" asked the Count in astonishment. "For example, if we were to go together to meet Luigi Vampa, I am sure that he would not refuse to grant you Albert's freedom." "Me? What influence could I have over this bandit?" "Have you not just rendered him the sort of service that is not easily forgotten?" "What service?" "Didn't you just save Peppino's life?" "Now who told you that?" "What does that matter? I know." The Count stayed silent for a moment, frowning. "If I went to meet Vampa, would you come with me?" "If my company was not too displeasing to you." "Very well. The night is fair, and a walk in the Roman Campagna can only do us good." "Should we arm ourselves?" "What for? Should we take any money?" "There is no need. Where is the man who brought this note?" "Outside in the street." "Is he waiting for an answer?" "Yes." "We must have some idea of where we are going. I'll call him." It's pointless, he does not want to come up." "To your apartments, perhaps, but he will not mind coming to mine." The Count went to the window of the study, which overlooked the street, and whistled in a particular way. The man in the cloak stepped out of the shadows and into the middle of the street. "Salite," the Count said, as if giving orders to a servant. The messenger obeyed at once, without hesitation, even eagerly, and, leaping across the 4 steps at the entrance to the hotel, came in. 5 seconds later, he was at the study door. "Ah, it's you, Peppino," said the Count. Peppino, instead of answering, fell to his knees, grasped the Count's hand, and pressed it to his lips repeatedly. "Well, I never," said the Count. "You have not yet forgotten how I saved your life. Odd, it was already a week ago." "No, Excellency, and I shall never forget," said Peppino, in a tone of voice that expressed the depth of his gratitude. Never is a very long time, but it counts for a lot that you should believe it. Stand up and answer me." Peppino looked anxiously at Franz. "Oh, you can speak in front of His Excellency," the Count said. "He is a friend of mine." Then he added in French, turning to Franz, "I hope you will allow me to call you that. It is necessary to gain this man's confidence." "You may speak in front of me," Franz said. "I am a friend of the Count's." "Fine," said Peppino, turning back to the Count. "Your Excellency can ask the questions, and I shall reply." "How did Vicomte Albert fall into Luigi's hands?" "Excellency, the Frenchman's carriage drove several times past the one with Teresa in it." "The chief's mistress?" "Yes. The Frenchman flirted with her, and it amused Teresa to reply. The Frenchman threw her bouquets. She threw some back. All this, of course, was with the chief's consent. He was in the carriage himself." "What?" Franz exclaimed. "Luigi Vampa was in the carriage with the peasant women?" "He was driving it, disguised as the coachman." "And then?" asked the Count. "Well, then the Frenchman took off his mask. Teresa, still with the chief's agreement, did the same. The Frenchman asked for a rendezvous, and Teresa agreed. However, in place of Teresa, it was Beppo who was waiting on the steps of San Giacomo." "What?" Franz exclaimed, interrupting him again. "The peasant girl who took his Mokoleti from him—" "Was a 15-year-old boy," Peppino answered. "But there is no shame for your friend in the mistake. Beppo, who's fooled lots of others, take my word for it." "And Beppo took him outside the walls?" asked the Count. "Just so. A carriage was waiting at the end of the Via Macello. Beppo got in and told the Frenchman to follow. He did not need asking twice. He graciously offered the right-hand seat to Beppo and sat beside him. Thereupon Beppo told him he would be driven to a villa a league outside Rome. The Frenchman assured Beppo that he was prepared to follow him to the end of the earth. At this, the coachman went up the Via Ripetta, through the Porto San Paolo, and 200 yards into the countryside. As the Frenchman was starting to get a little too forward, Beppo stuck a pair of pistols in his throat, upon which the coachman stopped the horses, turned around in his seat, and did the same. At the same time, 4 of our men, who had been hiding on the banks of the Almo, rushed across to the doors. The Frenchman tried his best to defend himself, and even, so I heard, half-strangled Beppo, but there was not much to be done against 5 armed men. He had to give up. He was taken out of the coach, along the banks of the stream, and eventually to Teresa and Luigi, who were waiting for him in the Catacombs of San Sebastian." "Well, what do you say to that?" said the Count, turning towards Franz. "It's not a bad story, I think. You are a connoisseur in such matters. What do you think?" "I think I would find it most amusing," Franz replied, "if it had happened to anyone except poor Albert." "The fact is," said the Count, "that if you had not found me there, your friend's good fortune would have cost him dear. But don't worry, in the event he will get away with a fright." "We're still going to find him?" "Certainly. All the more so since he is in a very picturesque spot. Do you know the Catacombs of San Sebastian?" "No, I have never been into them, but I had promised myself that I would visit them one day." "Well, now you have a ready-made opportunity, and it would be hard to find a better one. Do you have your carriage?" "No." "No matter, they invariably keep one ready harnessed for me day and night." "Ready harnessed?" "Yes, I must tell you, I am a very capricious person. Sometimes I get up from the table at the end of my dinner in the middle of the night, and I have a sudden desire to set off for some part of the world, so I leave." The Count rang, and his valet appeared. "Bring the carriage out of the coach-house," he said, "and take the pistols which you will find in the pockets. There is no sense in waking the coachman. Ali will drive." A moment later the carriage could be heard drawing up outside the door. The Count took out his watch. "Half-past midnight," he said. "We could have left at 5 o'clock in the morning and still arrived in time, but that delay might have meant your friend spending an unpleasant night, so we had better set off at once to rescue him from the clutches of the infidel. Are you still set on accompanying me?" "More than ever." "Well then, come." Franz and the Count left, followed by Peppino. They found the carriage waiting at the door, with Ali on the box. Franz recognized the slave from the grotto on Monte Cristo. Franz and the Count got into the carriage, a coupe. Peppino sat beside Ali, and they set off at a gallop. Ali had had his orders in advance, for he followed the Corso, crossed the Campo Vecchio, and drove up the Strada San Gregorio until they reached the Porto San Sebastiano. Here the gatekeeper tried to detain them, but the Count of Monte Cristo showed him an authorization from the governor of Rome, allowing him to go in or out of the city at any time of the day or night. So the gateway was raised, the keeper had a louis for his trouble, and they passed through. The road that the carriage followed was the old Appian Way, lined with tombs. From time to time, in the light of the newly risen moon, Franz saw what he thought was a sentry gliding out of a ruin, but as soon as a sign had been exchanged between Peppino and this wraith, it vanished back into the shadows. A little way before the amphitheatre of Caracalla, the carriage halted. Peppino opened the door, and Franz and the Count got down. "In 10 minutes," the Count told his companion, "we shall be there." He took Peppino aside, whispered some order to him, and Peppino left after taking a torch which they found in the trunk of the coupe. 5 more minutes elapsed, during which Franz saw the shepherd follow a little path between the hillocks, which litter the uneven surface of the Roman plain, and disappear into a clump of that tall, reddish grass which resembles the bristling mane of some gigantic lion. "Now," said the Count, "let's follow him." They went along the same path, and found that, after 100 paces, it went down a slope to the bottom of a little valley. Soon they saw 2 men talking together in the darkness. "Should we go on?" Franz asked the Count, "or should we wait?" "Carry on. Peppino must have warned the sentry of our arrival." One of the men, as it turned out, was Peppino, and the other a bandit acting as a guard. Franz and the Count approached, and the bandit greeted them. "Excellency," Peppino told the Count, "please be so good as to follow me. The entrance to the catacombs is a short distance from here." "Very well," said the Count. "Lead the way." Behind a clump of bushes, and hidden among some rocks, was an opening through which a man could barely pass. Peppino went through this slit first, but he had hardly advanced more than a step or 2 before the passage widened, so he stopped, lit his torch, and turned around to see that the others were following. The Count had been the next to venture into this sort of funnel, and Franz came after. The ground sloped gently downwards, and the path widened as they went on, but Franz and the Count were obliged to walk bent double, and would still have had difficulty in going 2 abreast. They continued for a further 50 yards like this, and were then stopped by the cry of, "Who goes there?" At the same time they saw the light from their own torch shining on the barrel of a rifle in the midst of the darkness. "A friend," said Peppino, and he went on alone to say a few words in a low voice to this second sentry, who, like the first, greeted the nocturnal visitors with a sign showing that they could continue on their way. Behind the sentry was a staircase of about 20 steps. Franz and the Count went down them, and found themselves in a sort of crossroads of tombs. 5 paths led off it like the rays of a star, and the walls were carved out with niches, one above the other, in the form of coffins, indicating that they had at last reached the catacombs. In one of the cavities, the depth of which it was impossible to assess, one could see by day a few chinks of light. The Count put his hand on Franz's shoulder. Would you like to see an encampment of bandits at rest?" he asked. "Yes, indeed," said Franz. "Then come with me. Peppino, put out the light." Peppino obeyed, and they found themselves plunged into the most profound darkness. However, about 50 yards ahead of them, a few reddish lights continued to play across the walls, made more visible since Peppino had put out his torch. They went on in silence, the Count guiding Franz as if he had the unusual ability of being able to see in the dark, and Franz himself could make out the way more easily the closer they approached to the glow that showed them their way. Eventually they passed through 3 arches, the middle one serving as a door. On one side these arches opened on the corridor down which the Count and Franz had walked, and on the other on a large square room completely surrounded by niches like the ones we have already mentioned. In the middle of the room stood 4 stones which had once served as an altar, as the cross on them still showed. A single lamp, placed on the shaft of a column, threw a faint and flickering light on the strange scene that met the eyes of the 2 visitors as they watched from the shadows. A man was sitting, his elbow resting on the column, and reading with his back turned towards the arches, through which the new arrivals could watch him. It was the chief of the band, Luigi Vampa. Around him could be seen some 20 bandits, lying as they chose, wrapped in their cloaks or propped against a sort of stone bench that ran all around the walls of the chamber. Each had his gun within reach. At the far end, hardly visible like a ghost, a sentry was walking backwards and forwards in front of a sort of opening that could only be made out because the darkness seemed thicker at this point. When the Count decided that Franz had had time to take in this picturesque scene, he put a finger to his lips to ensure his silence, then climbed the 3 steps leading from the passage to the chamber, went through the middle archway, and walked across to Vampa, who was so deeply engrossed in what he was reading that he did not hear the sound of footsteps. "Who goes there?" cried the sentry, more alert, seeing a sort of shadow growing in the light of the lamp behind his chief. At this, Vampa leapt to his feet, at the same time drawing a pistol from his belt. Immediately all the bandits were on their feet, and 20 gun barrels were pointing towards the Count. "Well, well," he said quietly, in a perfectly calm voice, with a muscle twitching in his face. "My dear Vampa, there is no need to go to such trouble just to greet a friend." "Put down your weapons," the bandit chief said, with an imperious gesture of one hand, while with the other he respectfully removed his hat. Then, turning to the remarkable figure who dominated the whole of the scene, he added, "I beg your pardon, Monsieur le Comte. I was not expecting you to honour me with a visit, and consequently did not recognize you." "It seems that your memory is short in everything, Vampa," the Count said. "Not only do you forget a man's face, but also the agreement you have made with him." "What agreement have I forgotten, Monsieur le Comte?" the bandit asked in a voice that implied that, if he had made a mistake, he asked nothing better than to make amends for it. "Was it not understood," said the Count, "that not only my own person, but also that of my friends would be sacred to you?" "How have I failed in this respect, Excellency?" "This evening you have abducted and brought here Vicomte Albert de Morcerf. Now," the Count continued in a voice that made Franz shudder, "this young man is one of my friends, staying at the same hotel as I am. He rode along the Corso for a week in my own carriage, yet, I repeat, you abducted him, brought him here, and—" here the Count took the letter out of his pocket, "you have set a price on his head, like any Tom, Dick, or Harry." "Why was I not told of this?" the chief asked, turning towards his men, who shrank away from his look. "Why did you put me in a situation where I might fail in my promise to the Count, who holds all our lives in his hands? By the blood of Christ, if I thought that any one of you knew that this young man was a friend of his Excellency, I should blow out his brains with my own hand." "You see," the Count said, turning towards Franz, "I told you that there must be some mistake." "You are not alone?" Vampa asked anxiously. "I am with the person to whom this letter is addressed, and I wanted to prove to him that Luigi Vampa is a man of his word." "Come, Excellency," he said to Franz, "Luigi Vampa will tell you himself that he is in despair at the mistake he has made." Franz came into the chamber. The chief stepped towards him. "Welcome among us, Excellency," he said. "You have heard what the Count just said, and my reply. I might add that I would not wish such a thing to have happened for the 4,000 piastres at which I set your friend's ransom." "But where is the prisoner?" Franz asked, looking all around him anxiously. "I can't see him." "I hope no harm has come to him," the Count said, frowning. "The prisoner is there," Vampa said, pointing to the recess in front of which the sentry was marching. "I shall go myself and tell him that he is free." The chief went over to the place which he had indicated as Albert's prison, followed by the Count and Franz. "What is the prisoner doing?" Vampa asked the sentry. "My word, I don't know, Captain," he replied. "I haven't heard him stir for more than an hour." "Come, Excellency," Vampa said. The Count and Franz went up 7 or 8 steps, still following the chief, who slipped a bolt and pushed open a door. By the light of a lamp like the one burning in the adjoining chamber, they could see Albert, wrapped in a cloak that he had been lent by one of the bandits, lying in a corner and sleeping profoundly. "Look at that," the Count said. Look at that," the Count said, smiling his peculiar smile. "Not bad for a man who was to be shot at 7 tomorrow morning." Vampa looked at the sleeping figure with a certain degree of admiration. It was clear that he was not unimpressed by this proof of courage. "You are right, Monsieur le Comte," he said. "This must be one of your friends." Then, crossing over to Albert and touching him on the shoulder, he said, "Excellency, would you wake up?" Albert stretched his arms, rubbed his eyes, and opened them. "Ah, it's you, Captain," he said. "Egad, you might have let me sleep. I was having a delightful dream. I dreamed that I was dancing the galopade at Torlonia's with Countess G." He took out his watch, which he had kept so that he could himself keep track of the time. "But it's only 1:30 in the morning," he exclaimed. "Why the devil are you waking me up at this time?" "To tell you that you are free, Excellency." "My dear friend," Albert said with perfect equanimity, "in future be so good as to remember this maxim of our great Emperor Napoleon: only wake me up when it's bad news. If you had let me sleep, I should have finished my galopade and been grateful to you for the rest of my life. So, have they paid my ransom?" "No, Excellency." "Then how does it come about that I am free?" "Someone to whom I can refuse nothing has come to ask for your freedom." "Come here?" "Here." "Then, by heaven, he's a most generous someone." Albert looked around and saw Franz. "What? My dear Franz, are you so devoted a friend?" No, Franz replied. "It is not I, but our neighbour, the Count of Monte Cristo." "Well, bless me," said Albert merrily, adjusting his cravat and his cuffs. "Monsieur le Comte, you're a precious friend indeed, and I hope that you will consider me eternally obliged to you, firstly for the matter of the carriage, and then for this." He held his hand out to the Count, who shuddered as he took it in his own, but did return the handshake even so. The bandit was watching the whole of the scene with stupefaction. Obviously he was used to his prisoners trembling before him, but here was one whose derisive and quizzical mood had not faltered for a moment. As for Franz, he was delighted that Albert had upheld the honour of their nation, even when dealing with a bandit. "My dear Albert," he said, "if you would hurry, we may yet have time to end the night in Torlonia's. You can resume your gallopade where you left it off, and in that way you will harbour no grudge against Signor Luigi, who has truly acted as a man of honour in all this business." "Certainly," he said. "You are right. We could be there at 2:00. Signor Luigi," Albert continued, "are there any other formalities to be completed before we may take leave of your Excellency?" "None at all, monsieur," the bandit said. "You are as free as the air." "In that case, I wish you a long life and good fortune. Come, gentlemen, come." and Albert, followed by Franz and the Count, went down the stairs and across the square chamber. All the bandits were standing with their hats in their hands. "Peppino," said their leader, "give me the torch." "What are you doing?" asked the Count. "I shall show you the way," the captain said. "It's the least I can do for your excellency." Taking the lighted torch from the hands of the shepherd, he went ahead of his guests, not like a valet who does some servant's work, but like a king leading a group of ambassadors. Arriving at the entrance, he bowed. "And now, Monsieur le Comte, I apologize again and hope that you will bear me no ill will for what has happened." "None, my dear Vampa," said the Count. "In any event, you make up for your mistakes with such gallantry that one is almost grateful to you for having committed them." "Gentlemen," the chief said, turning towards the two young men, "the offer may perhaps not appear very attractive to you, but should you ever wish to pay me a second visit, you will be welcome wherever I am." Franz and Albert bowed. The Count went out first, followed by Albert, Franz staying until last. "Does your excellency have something to ask me?" said Vampa, smiling. "Yes, I admit," Franz replied. "I should very much like to know what book you were reading so attentively when we arrived." "Caesar's Commentaries," the bandit said. "It is my favourite reading." "Aren't you coming?" Albert called. "Yes," Franz replied. "Yes, here I am." And he followed the others through the narrow opening. And they started off across the plain. "Oh, one moment," said Albert, turning back. May I, Captain?" And he lit his cigar on Vampa's torch. "Now, Monsieur le Comte," he said, "as quickly as possible. I am very keen to finish the night at the Duke of Bracciano's." The carriage was still where they had left it. The Count said a single word in Arabic to Ali, and the horses set off at full speed. It was exactly 2:00 by Albert's watch when the two friends came into the ballroom. Their return caused a sensation, but as they were coming in together, all anxieties that people may have had about Albert immediately ceased. "Madame," said the Vicomte de Morcerf, stepping over to the Countess, "yesterday you had the goodness to promise me a galopade. I am a little late in asking you to fulfill this kind promise, but my friend here, whose trustworthiness you know, will confirm that it was not my fault." As at this moment the musicians were striking up a waltz, Albert put his arm around the Countess's waist and disappeared with her into the whirlwind of dancers. Franz, meanwhile, was thinking about the extraordinary shudder that had passed through the whole of the Count of Monte Cristo's body at the moment where he was more or less obliged to give Albert his hand. Chapter 38. The Rendezvous. The first thing that Albert said on getting up the next day was to suggest that he and Franz went to visit the Count. He had already thanked him on the previous evening, but he realized that he deserved to be thanked twice for a service such as the one he had performed for him. Franz, who was drawn towards the Count by an attraction mingled with terror, accompanied Albert because he did not want to let him go to see the man alone. Both of them were introduced into the drawing-room. 5 minutes later, the Count appeared. "Monsieur le Comte," Albert said, advancing towards him, "allow me to repeat this morning what I could only imperfectly tell you yesterday, which is that I shall never forget the nature of the assistance you gave me, and that I shall always remember that I owe you my life, or nearly so." "My dear neighbour," the Count replied, laughing, "you are exaggerating your debt to me. All I did was to save you the sum of 20,000 francs on the expenses of your trip, nothing more. As you see, it is hardly worth mentioning. For your part," he added, "may I congratulate you on your remarkable nerve and coolness." "How else could I behave, Count?" said Albert. "I pretended to myself that I had got into an argument and a duel had resulted. I wanted to demonstrate something to those bandits, namely that while people fight one another in every country in the world, only a Frenchman jests as he fights. However, since my obligation to you is no less great for all that, I have come to ask you if, either myself or through my friends, or my own acquaintances, I might not be of some service to you. My father, the Comte de Morcerf, who is a Spaniard by origin, holds high positions in both France and Spain, so I have come to put myself and all those who are fond of me at your disposal. Well, said the Count, I must confess, Monsieur de Morcerf, that I was expecting your offer, and that I accept it gratefully. I had already set my heart on the idea of asking a great service of you. What service? I have never been to Paris. I do not know the city. Really? Albert exclaimed. Have you managed to live so long without seeing Paris? That is incredible. It is so, none the less. But, like you, I feel that it is not possible for me to remain any longer in ignorance of the capital of the intelligent world. There is something more. I might have even made this essential journey a long time ago if I had known someone who could have introduced me into Parisian society, but I have no connections there. What? A man like you? Said Albert. You are very kind. But since I would not claim any greater merit for myself than that of being able to compete in wealth with Monsieur Aguado or Monsieur Rothschild, and since I am not going to Paris to invest on the stock exchange, this little consideration prevented me. Now, thanks to your offer, I have made up my mind. So, do you promise, dear Monsieur de Morcerf? The Count smiled in a singular manner as he said these words. Do you promise, when I go to France, to open for me the doors of that society where I shall be as much a foreigner as a Huron or a Chinese? Oh, so far as that is concerned, Monsieur le Comte, entirely and most willingly, Albert replied. And all the more so, my dear Franz, do not make too much fun of me. Since I have been recalled to Paris by a letter which I received this morning, which speaks of my alliance with a very fine house, and one that has excellent connections in Parisian society. An alliance by marriage? Franz asked, laughing. Heavens above, yes. So when you return to Paris, you will find me firmly settled down, and perhaps even a father. This should suit my natural gravity, don't you think? In any case, Count, I repeat, I and my family are entirely at your disposal. I accept, said the Count. I assure you that I was only waiting for this opportunity to carry out some plans that I have been considering for a long time. Franz did not doubt for a moment that these plans were the same that the Count had mentioned in passing in the caves of Monte Cristo, and he watched him as he was speaking in an attempt to glimpse something in his expression which would indicate what it was that would bring him to Paris. But it was very difficult to probe the man's soul, especially when he veiled it with a smile. Come now, Count, Albert went on, delighted at the idea of being able to exhibit a man like Monte Cristo. Isn't this one of those vague plans, like thousands that one makes when travelling, which are founded on sand and which blow away in the first breeze? No, I guarantee that, said the Count. I want to go to Paris. I must go there. When? When will you be there yourself? Me? Said Albert. My goodness, in a fortnight or 3 weeks, as long as it takes me to get there. In that case, said the Count, I give you 3 months. You see that I am leaving you considerable latitude. And in 3 months, Albert exclaimed joyfully, you will knock on my door? Do you want us to make an appointment, day for day and hour for hour? Said the Count. I warn you, I am fearfully punctual. Day for day, hour for hour, said Albert. That will suit me down to the ground. Agreed, then. He reached over to a calendar hanging beside the mirror. Today is the 21st of February. He took out his watch, and it is 10:30 in the morning. May I call at 10:30 on May the 21st next? Perfect, said Albert. Breakfast will be ready. Where do you live? Number 27, Rue de Elder, sorry. Is that a bachelor's apartment? I won't be disturbing you. I live in my father's house, but in entirely separate lodgings at the back of the courtyard." "Very well." The Count took his notebook and wrote, "Rue de Helder, number 27, on May the 21st, at 10:30 in the morning." "Now," he said, returning the notebook to his pocket, "have no fear. The hand of your clock will not be more punctual than I." "Shall I see you before my departure?" asked Albert. "That depends. When do you leave?" "Tomorrow at 5 in the evening." "In that case I must bid you farewell. I have business in Naples, and I shall not return until Saturday evening or Sunday morning." "And you, Monsieur le Baron?" the Count asked, turning to France. "Are you also leaving?" "Yes." "For France?" "No, for Venice. I shall be staying another year or two in Italy." "So we shall not see you in Paris?" "I fear I shall not have that honour." "Very well, gentlemen. Bon voyage," the Count said to the two friends, offering each of them a hand. This was the first time that Franz had touched the man's hand, and he shuddered. It was as icy as the hand of a corpse. "One last time," said Albert. "It's agreed, isn't it, on your word? Number 27, Rue de Helder, on May the 21st at 10:30 in the morning." "May the 21st at 10:30 in the morning, at number 27, Rue de Helder," the Count repeated. At this, the two young men took their leave of the Count and left. "What's wrong?" Albert asked Franz when they got back to his rooms. "You seem quite preoccupied with something." "Yes," said Franz. "I must confess that the Count is an odd man, and I am worried about the rendezvous that he made with you in Paris." "Worried? About the rendezvous? I never! Are you mad, my dear Franz?" Albert exclaimed. "Mad or not, I can't help it." "Listen," Albert said, "I am happy to have an opportunity to say this to you. I have always thought you behaved rather coldly towards the Count, while I think he, on his side, has always been most agreeable towards us. Do you have anything in particular against him?" "Perhaps." "Did you come across him somewhere before meeting him here?" "Precisely." "Where?" "Do you promise me that you will not say a word of what I am about to tell you?" "I promise." "On your honour?" "On my honour." "Very well. Then I'll tell you." Franz described his voyage to the island of Monte Cristo, how he had found a crew of smugglers there, and 2 Corsican bandits among them. He told at great length about the fairy tale hospitality that the Count had offered him in his grotto out of the 1001 Nights, the supper, the hashish, the statues, reality and dream, and how when he woke up there was nothing left as evidence to recall any of these events except the little yacht sailing over the horizon towards Porto Vecchio. Then he went on to Rome, to the night in the Colosseum and the conversation that he had heard between the Count and Vampa concerning Peppino, in which the Count promised to secure a pardon for the bandit, a promise which he had fully kept, as the readers can judge. Finally he got to the adventure of the previous night, the difficulty he found himself in when he discovered that he was 600 or 700 piastres short of the necessary amount, and the idea that he had eventually had of going to the Count, an idea that had had such an exotic and, at the same time, satisfactory outcome. Albert listened attentively. "Well now," he said when the story was over, "what do you have to reproach him with in all this? The Count is a traveller, and he had his own boat because he's rich. Go to Portsmouth or Southampton, and you will see the ports crowded with yachts belonging to rich Englishmen who are indulging the same whim, so that he has somewhere to stop in his travels, and so that he does not have to eat this frightful cooking that has been poisoning me for the past 4 months, and you for the past 4 years, and so that he does not have to lie in those abominable beds where you can't sleep. He had a pied-à-terre fitted out on Monte Cristo. When it was furnished, he was afraid that the Tuscan government would expel him and that he would lose his money, so he bought the island and took its name. My dear friend, just think, how many people can you remember who have taken the names of properties that they never had?" But what about the Corsican Bandits in his crew? Franz asked. What about them? What is surprising about that? You know as well as anyone that Corsican bandits are not thieves, but purely and simply outlaws who have been exiled from their town or their village because of some vendetta. Anyone can mix with them without being compromised. Why, I do declare that if ever I go to Corsica, before I am introduced to the governor and the prefect, I shall have myself introduced to the bandits of Columba, if they are anywhere to be found. I think they're delightful. But Vampa and his band, Franz went on, are bandits that abduct people to steal from them. You won't deny that, at least, I hope. What do you say about the Count's influence over such men? What I say, my dear man, is that since I probably owe my life to it, it's not my place to criticize him. So, instead of treating this influence as a capital offence, as you do, I wonder if you would mind if I excuse him. If not for having saved my life, which might be going a little too far, at least for saving me 4,000 piastres, which is a good 24,000 livres in our money. I should certainly not have had such a high price in France. Which only goes to prove, Albert added, laughing, that no man is a prophet in his own country. Precisely, there you have it. What country does the Count come from? What is his language? What are his means of support? Where does his huge fortune come from? What was the first half of this mysterious and unknown life that it has cast over the second half such a dark and misanthropic shadow? That, if I were you, is what I would want to know. My dear Franz, Albert said, when you received my letter and you saw that we needed the Count's influence, you went to tell him. My friend Albert de Morcerf is in danger. Help me to rescue him from it. Is that not so? Yes. And did he ask you, who is that Albert de Morcerf? Where does he get his name? Where does his fortune come from? What are his means of support? What is his country? Where was he born? Tell me, did he ask you all that? No, he didn't, I admit. He came quite simply. He helped me to escape from the clutches of Monsieur Vampa, in which, despite what you call my air of entire unconcern, I must confess I was in a pretty sorry pass. Well, my dear fellow, when in exchange for such a service he asks me to do what one does every day for the first Russian or Italian prince who passes through Paris, that is to say, to introduce him to society, how could I refuse? You are mad to suggest it. It must be admitted at that time, contrary to what was usually the case, Albert had all the arguments on his side. Very well, Franz said, sighing. Do as you wish, my dear Vicomte, because I have to agree that everything you have just said is very persuasive. But the fact remains that the Count of Monte Cristo is a very strange man. The Count of Monte Cristo is a philanthropist. He didn't tell you his purpose in coming to Paris, but he is coming to take part in the Prix Montyon, and if he only needs my vote, and that of the very ugly gentleman who distributes them to succeed, then I shall give him the first, and make sure he has the second. With that, my dear Franz, let's say no more about it, but have lunch and go on a final visit to St. Peter's. It was as Albert said, and the following day, at 5 in the afternoon, the two young men took their leave of one another, Albert de Morcerf to return to Paris, and Franz d'Épinay to go and spend a fortnight in Venice. But before he got into his carriage, Albert gave the waiter at the hotel a card for the Count of Monte Cristo, so determined was he that his guest should not fail to attend their meeting. On it were the words, Vicomte Albert de Morcerf, and under them, in pencil, May the 21st, at 10:30 in the morning, at 27, Rue de Elder. And I think that is where we shall end for tonight. Dun dun.